This session is the first time we're actually doing something like this. We're going to talk about the fundraising jobs of the future, sort of what's happening in the world, how is that shaping our careers, and if you're interested in building your career in fundraising over the next 5 and 10 years, what steps might you want to take? And so, very excited about this. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. As usual, this is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. There, at the end of the session, there will be a survey to certify your participation. Fill that out, make a note, and then we'll make sure to back you up in case you get audited. Here's the agenda for today. Don't worry about this. I'm not going to read it all aloud. Big thing to know is that the recordings and the slides will be sent around later today. Still, there will be someone who asks about this in a moment. That is okay. But you can just remind them in the chat if you get a chance that, yes, we will send this around later. Okay, what else? Introductions. So very quickly, my name is Patrick. Well, I'm very lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill, alongside my wonderful friend, Jenny Xia Spradling. I'm in New York City. Jenny is out in the great city of Seattle. And we are lucky to be part of the wonderful FreeWill team, about 200 folks, over 4 centuries of combined fundraising experience. The FreeWill products are beloved by 1,600 plus leading nonprofits. And we have been lucky enough to be featured in things like the New York Times and Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and Town and Country, Good Housekeeping, and other things like that. So very excited to be here with you. And just noting that a lot of the research that we've done and a lot of what we're presenting is done by a lot more folks than me, primarily my friend and colleague, Phoebe. So Phoebe's on the call. Big shout out to you, Phoebe. A couple more housekeeping things before we get started. We're so grateful to have you here. We're so grateful to be able to help you build your careers. One of the things we like to do on these is give away some of my very favorite books. This is the first book I've read about management. I was probably 20 years old at this point, 15 years old at this point. And it's a great book by Allison Green and Jerry Hauser of the Management Center. It's called Managing and Change the World, the Nonprofit Manager's Guide to Getting Results. It is an excellent book on management. And so we will be sending this to 20 folks. At the end of the session, drop a quick note in the survey if you'd like a copy of it, and we will send it to you. Make sure to include your address as well, but just a big thank you. By the way, if you're not a manager, it's still worth reading. And after you read it, give it to your manager, because everyone who has so much of happiness is based on how good your boss is at managing. All right, so we asked you how your week is going. Generally, people are feeling good, which is a really good sign. Summer's here, family time is here, kids are out of school. Sometimes the kids are off for camp, and so you have a little bit of quiet time, but some really generally good things here. And then a little bit of a bounce back in how confident people are in hitting their goals this year. So this is a transition from previous highs in June, but we're seeing a lot of positive results. We're seeing a lot of smart gifts come through, a lot of stock gifts, a lot of QCDs, a lot of donor advised fund grants. And so all of that is pretty exciting. Okay, so that's all background intros. One of our many ways of saying we love being here with you. Now let's get really into it. So we're going to talk first about some really big trends in the world that are affecting the workplace, both in the nonprofit sector and beyond. Then we'll talk about some insights derived from these trends. And then we'll talk about some very practical tips on what to do about it. So stick with me and hope this is useful. One of the things that's most important to look at in sort of any historical or macro trend is demographics, because demographics are the most predictable trend, right? If we know exactly how many people will be 19 next year based on how many people are 18 this year. And one of the things we're seeing is we're entering an unprecedented retirement wave. We haven't seen anything like this in the history of the United States, in the history of Canada, and the history of the United Kingdom. An average of 11,000 Americans are expected to celebrate their 65th birthday every day in 2024. That is, by the way, the sort of standard traditional year for retirement, although obviously it varies quite widely. 2024 is expected to be a record-breaking year for retirement. And on average, men are retiring at 65 in the United States, women are retiring at 63, again, just on average, right? So there's a big range here. But what it means is you're having a lot of folks leaving the workplace, which creates a lot of different transitions and opportunities, right? Just as a quick reminder, baby boomers are the largest population in terms of a generation in the history of the United States. And as they retire, what this means is there aren't necessarily as many workers entering the workforce in every industry to fill those gaps left behind, right? And a lot of these folks are leaving from leadership positions because they've been in their careers 25 and 30 years, not all of them, but many. And so it leaves a lot of gaps to fill and a lot of opportunities for job advancement. Second big trend is that as boomers are beginning to retire, who's entering the workforce? Well, it's our friends Gen Z. This will include many of you, and also many of you will be boomers and everything in between. So this year in 2024, Gen Z is expected to overtake baby boomers in terms of number of folks in the workforce, first time. They will make up 30% of the workforce by 2030. They are the most ethnically, and racially diverse generation in history. They're more than twice as likely to want to be CEO compared with Gen X. So those of you that are also CEOs, watch out, they're coming for you. And even though the group is ambitious, more than half say they would turn down a job that doesn't offer work-life balance. So you have some different priorities compared to other generations. All right, so first trend, the gradual departure of boomers. Second trend, entering the stage is Gen Z. Third is that unemployment is extremely low, right? There are 8.1 million open jobs in the United States, only 6.6 million unemployed workers. It means there are more jobs than people, and there's just a filtering problem. 83 workers for every 100 jobs. And over the next 10 years, this is going to get worse if you're an employer before it gets better, right? So you're seeing a lot of early retirement, less immigration, and it's resulted in a worker deficit in the United States. This creates a lot of hiring challenges if you're a manager, if you're senior leadership, trying to find talented folks to put in these seats. It also creates more negotiating power for workers, right? This is just a simple mechanic of supply and demand. It also will result in more part-time, more consultant hires, and more technology to fill gaps because you can't always find the people to do the job that you want to do, right? So it's been a lot more of sort of scrappy efforts to fill the gaps when we can't always fill the roles. Just to give you a sense here, and I know that there's a lot of mixed views on the economy, but from a historical standpoint, we are actually at an incredibly high rate of employment. I mean, just a historic, unbelievable level. And the United States, by the way, is outperforming virtually every other country in this metric. So you can see we've been at about 3.6% unemployment for the last 2 years. I mean, this is, from a historical standpoint, unbelievably outstanding. It's not that long ago. In 08 and 09, we hit 9.3% unemployment. We hit it again at 7.5% in the early 90s. You see the dot-com bust. People remember that? We hit 6%. We hit 8% during COVID, and yet we're all the way down. Now, this is generally a good thing for the world. It's generally a good thing for the economy. But what it does mean is that when you're hiring, it's harder to find the right talent because there's just more jobs and more openings than people to fill them. You can see here, right, what this looks like historically. And again, it's one of the biggest gaps we've ever seen in terms of how many jobs are there versus how many folks to fill it. So this is a big deal. When we look at worker shortages by state, right, where's this most acute? Well, you start to see in more rural states that there's actually a worker shortage. So there's not an unemployment problem. There's a too many jobs problem. So you see this most acutely in these orange states: North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Mississippi, Virginia, Maryland, New Hampshire. Now, these aren't nonprofit jobs. These are generally jobs. But just to give you a sense of where it's most acute. Big trend 4 that's changing the workplace pretty quickly is what we call the AI factor. So 4 out of 10 Americans right now, when we poll them, fear that AI will take their jobs. And it's estimated that AI can already automate about 10% of the tasks in the US economy. I mean, it's pretty impressive technology. But what we think here is not that it's going to take your jobs, but that proficiency in AI will be critical for those transitioning out of other sectors or into higher paying roles, right? So it's going to become a real must-have for folks in a lot of these roles, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So when we ask you, okay, what role are you in right now? You have about 10% EDs, 13% heads of fundraising or VPs, 40% what we call mid-level fundraising professionals, some folks in marketing, some folks in program managers, and some others as well, right? And so what we see here is generally the folks that are sort of in the most interesting spot here are the folks who spend a lot of time with donors. So the folks who are, quote, mid-level fundraising professionals, right? These are the folks who are spending the most time with donors. That is a really good role to be in, right? This sort of one-to-one relationship building, that's going to be very hard to be disintermediated by technology. But it is the case that technology is going to make your life a lot better. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Trend 5, right? The rise of remote work. I mean, this is just unbelievably striking. So, I mean, it's easy to forget how recently we all went to an office every day of the week, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, right? In many cases. And COVID obviously changed all this. I won't talk to you too much about that. But it's shifted this, shifted it so dramatically that even though the dials turned back a little bit to in-person work, remote work is likely to become even more common in the next 10 years. And by 2025, an estimated 22% of the US workforce will be working remotely. 22%. I mean, this is really astonishing. Worker preferences seem to align with this trend. 98% of workers say they would like to work remotely at least part of the time. According to the US Career Institute, 63% of employees consider remote work to be the most important aspect of a job. Get this, even more important than things like health insurance or salary. So people will take a lower salary or worse benefits to work remotely, which is a big deal. And I think this is a really impressive, a really important underappreciated aspect of remote work. Remote work decreases friction in the hiring market. So what that means is that a talented person who lives in Michigan can take a role or a job in Virginia, right, working for a museum there or something else, and not have to move, right? It used to be the case, and many of you will remember this, that you might have a job you love, but then your spouse gets a job in a new state and you have to quit. And that's really shifting. So people can stay in roles longer, but they can also leave earlier because more jobs are available to them. Remote work is really shifting the way the hiring market works. And my sense is that's partly what's pushing down unemployment. When we ask people, what is the most important aspects of a job? Things like having remote work shows up number 1, again, over salary, over flexible schedule, over work-life boundaries, career advancement opportunities, other things like that show up as well. What else happens here, right? It's not just employees tend to love remote work, but 80% of managers feel their team is more productive when they work remotely, which is really striking. And that's a shift from what you would have seen a few years ago. Remote work tends to inspire a sense of trust between team members. 56% of hiring managers believe working remotely has gone even better than they expected, which is certainly true of us at FreeWill, right? So we used to have an office, very pretty office, in New York City, right? Cross streets of Canal and Broadway, if you know where it is, and loved being there every day. And then one day I had to walk around and tap everybody on the shoulder and said, listen, pack up your laptop. You're probably not coming in for 2 weeks. And 2 weeks became 2 months, and 2 months became 2 years. And eventually the team went fully remote. And it's astonishing how well it's gone. We never would have expected it. This is true across the world, by the way. The World Economic Forum estimates that a quarter of jobs worldwide will be remote by 2030. So you see a really big shift here. When we asked you, right, and this is going to be representative of nonprofit fundraising professionals, 29% says, yes, I can work 100% of the time remotely. Another 40% said, yes, I can work partially remote, right, a couple of days a week. I mean, combined, that's just an enormous sum. 30% say occasionally, and only 8% say, no, I can never work remotely. I mean, if we had taken this 5 years ago, what would we have seen? Well, we asked you 5 years ago, and half of you said, no, I can't work remotely at all 5 years ago. And only 15% said yes, 100% remotely. So this is 5 years ago, 2019. This is not a long period. And you can see how big that jump is in a relatively short amount of time. Another big trend that's happening is that the shape of fundraising is changing as we speak, in part due to the demographics that we talked about. So according to the 2023 Planned Giving report by CCS, legacy gifts made up 17% of all fundraising. And the latest Giving USA report that came out, I believe, last week or the week before, the only category that went up and outpaced inflation was bequests or planned gifts. This trend is expected to continue as we get into the Great Wealth Transfer, which is going to last at least 2 more decades. So for many of you, that will be the entirety of your career. An estimated $90 trillion will be transferred, from older generations to their heirs and to charities. And it's probably the biggest opportunity for philanthropy in the history of the world. Nonprofits can expect to receive more unexpected planned gifts than ever before, and expertise in planned giving is going to be in high demand. So what's happening, there's a lot of folks who are in plan giving who are in those retirement ages, and there's going to be a real vacuum of plan giving expertise. And that's going to have to get filled because it's getting even more important, right? So there's a scarcity of expertise at the same time that it becomes even more important. And so if this is an attribute that you have, and this is a skill that you learn about, you're going to be in very high demand in the hiring market, right? Just as a quick reminder, we said this earlier with retirement, but the boomer population is so large. The oldest generation, or the oldest boomers, are about 78 this year, right? Turning 80 over the next 2 years. The youngest are about, let's see, 1964, makes you about 60, is that right? And so these are the folks who are moving into retirement and then eventually passing away, quite sadly, obviously, but making plan giving very, very important, right? You see this, not only are they so numerous, but they're obviously just enormously wealthy compared to most folks in the country. Trend 7, we're seeing increased push on DEI across teams. The workforce, because of the demographic shifts, will be much more diverse in 10 years than it is today. Investment in DEI is projected to double by 2026. Over 75% of job seekers view DEI as an important factor when considering a job, right? So it's an important part if you're hiring. 44% of women said they would not work for a company they considered to be non-inclusive. And according to a nonprofit HR's report, 89% of respondents think their nonprofit is making progress towards DEI goals, which is a really big uptake compared to just a few years previous. Okay, so those are some really big trends happening in the world. What ought we to do about it, right? What are the insights that we'll look for? So let's dive in here, right? First is, Gen Z is showing up. And I was in this really interesting conversation the other day with a bunch of managers and a career consultant. And some of the managers who are millennials, Gen X, were complaining a little bit about Gen Z and some of their behavior in the workplace. And the sort of HR consultant said, well, who else are you going to hire? Like, this is it. You got, get used to it, because Gen Z is here. Gen Z is the most diverse generation in history. It's the first to grow up totally digitally natives, right? Millennials are the last people to really remember life before the internet. Gen Z has no picture of that. By 2030, as I mentioned, Gen Z will make up 30% of the workforce. As a result, the jobs and the workplaces will become more diverse, more tech savvy, more socially conscious. This is especially true for nonprofit organizations because mission-driven work is highly attractive to Gen Z job seekers, right? So you're gonna have a lot of mission-oriented Gen Zers entering the workforce or already here. And this is gonna shape some things about fundraising, right? Unlike older generations, Gen Z is less attuned to traditional role hierarchies. They prefer collaboration over standard structure. They're less formal. They may need tips on things like appropriate dress for work or how to meet with donors. Remember that many of these folks missed years of in-person college because COVID hit just then. And so a lot of these things that you might take for granted as social cues or professional norms actually aren't apparent. And by the way, this is especially true in remote work, right? So the people that really love remote work tend to be the people that used to work in an office and now have all this space. If you have Gen Zers who have never been in an office and don't get to watch you, if you're an older professional here, right, meaning older than Gen Z, they don't get to watch you behave, converse with your colleagues, dress, go talk to donors, all these things, because they're working remotely, then you're going to need to give them extra training and extra support. And a lot of people miss this, right? If you spent 2 years in college remotely, and then your only job has been remote, there's a lot of training that you would get by osmosis that you're missing. And so there's a lot of training that needs to be done here. All right. What else on Gen Z, right? Mental health and well-being are huge priorities for them. A lot of folks in surveys of Gen Z will list mental health as their #1 concern. They tend to be less loyal to employers compared to older generations and are much more willing to job switch with frequency. And although Gen X, which is soon to be the oldest generation working, right, as boomers retire, we're not there yet, but we will be in 5 or 6 years. They're also considered less loyal than boomers, right? So job switching gets more frequent from Gen X from boomers, from millennials from Gen X, and Gen Z from millennials. Overall, there'll be a more concerted effort to incentivize wellness and decrease turnover to attract and retain Gen Z. This is going to be really important, right? Now, as we talked about Gen Z entering the workforce, Gen X is increasingly becoming the most senior people at an organization. Now, we're not kicking out boomers, right? They're still there. But for many people, boomers have been the most senior folks for decades, and so they're sort of used to this. And now Gen X is really stepping up here, right? Gen X makes up 20% of the population, but they make up 50% of all leadership positions right now. They struggle with being categorized as less technologically adept as younger generations. They're really actually quite strong in this. Gen X is often called the forgotten generation, and they might feel passed over for millennials or Gen Zs. A lot of Gen Xers, when we talk, say, why don't you talk more about our generation? And it tends to actually be in sort of the media and in popular culture, less prevalent than boomers and millennials. In part, if you remember, that graph, it's a smaller generation than either of those, right? And as we look to fill the experience gap created by the retirement wave, Gen X is going to move into a lot of these roles. So what do we need to know about Gen X, right? They value recognition in their work. 64% of Gen Xers rate job prestige as their highest work priority. They prefer direct communication, which might clash with younger colleagues, right? They're very direct, they're very specific. But generally, their views on work make them well-suited to lead a multi-generational workplace, right? They tend to be very pluralist, to be a little bit open and accepting. They're very goal-oriented. Many of their views on work-life balance and traditional hierarchy more align with Gen Z than they did with baby boomers. All right, insight 3, we have this more jobs than people problem that we talked about earlier. Staffing shortage is a huge problem for nonprofits. 3 out of 4 nonprofits currently report job vacancies. A third of those nonprofits identified vacancy rates of 20% or more, meaning 20% of the roles of the organization are unfilled right now, which is just an incredible problem. As baby boomers retire in greater numbers, there will be more roles to fill and not necessarily enough people to do it, right? We asked if you had nonprofit vacancies on your fundraising team, 23% have at least one, another 15% have more than one. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these fundraising teams are 2, 3, 4 people. So this is actually quite striking. Insight 4, this is the way to think about AI. AI is not here for your job, right? There's a lot of concern about the impact of AI on your jobs, but nonprofit fundraising jobs are some of the best suited to benefit from an AI evolution. It will help you do your jobs better and faster and raise more money. It will serve as a replacement for the jobs and the tasks that you don't want to do, but it's not going to take the role of things that you do want to do. Things like data entry, admin tasks, data analysis, even proposal writing can be automated by AI, but things like meeting with donors is not. It's also here to help because burnout is a huge problem in the nonprofit sector. The voluntary turnover rate for nonprofits is almost 20%, which is much higher than the broader labor market. According to a global survey, nearly 60% of workers believe AI can help with burnout. A study conducted by Stanford and MIT found that AI implementation led to a significant increase in worker productivity. And by the way, this same study found a significant increase in worker happiness, which is an even bigger deal. Automation is going to make your one-on-one donor interactions more important. So you want to get great at that stuff, which can't be replaced. Coming back to AI, right? A lot of people are sort of sitting here thinking, oh my God, is it going to cover my job or am I going to take advantage of it? I would think about AI as the equivalent of a bicycle, right? So I occasionally go on runs. I'm not very fast. But if you gave me a bicycle, I would be competitive in like the Boston Marathon. I mean, I can probably bike as fast as the fastest runners, which is not very impressive generally, but it's bicycling. Bikes are just a piece of technology here. And what's going to happen over the next few years in the job market is the people that can use AI alongside their skills are going to be the people who are riding bikes instead of just running. And they're going to be much more effective. Now, that bike sitting on its side is not going to do anything without you. And so it's really this pair of you and technology that's going to be vastly better than other folks in the job market. And it's a really important component to get to. All right, insight 6. When we go back to this work from anywhere concept, we believe it's likely that teams will be more spread out geographically in the next 10 years. The highest concentration of nonprofits are in California, New York, and Texas. And that used to mean you'd have to live in New York, California, or Texas, which, by the way, especially New York and California, tend to be very expensive places to live. So your hiring pool is limited to these folks. And now, with the rise of remote work, hiring options expand, employment options expand, and you might not need to move for a new job. So you might see a salary increase with a new job. And if you're doing hiring, you might have access to better talent because it's not just the folks in your town or in your zip code. It also means for some of you, you might end up working an extra year or two because you think, wow, it's actually just physically less demanding than the 90-minute drive each way you used to do, from Reston, Virginia to your job in DC or whatever it may be. So this ends up being really important. Insight 7, right? The rise of remote work means the digital literacy becomes even more important, right? Digital literacy and digital communication becomes the new office dress code, right? There's a wider adoption of remote work. You need reliable technology to stay connected. Employees are going to be expected to be fluent in things like Zoom, which you obviously are being right here, things like Slack or Microsoft Teams, and get very good at this, right? It will include also understanding basic cybersecurity and how to make sure you're not getting phished or hacked. Familiarity with project management and productivity tools will be important in helping workers self-manage their time, right? So one of the things I miss most about being in the office is having a big whiteboard to go share ideas with folks and trying to find substitutes. Not always ideal, but being able to work effectively in this new paradigm tends to be incredibly useful. All right, insight 8, as I mentioned earlier, the best teams are centering DEI. Embracing DEI is not only the right thing to do, but it's also going to be a big path for long-term success, right? It improves strategic thinking and worker productivity. It allows you to connect better with donors, but it's also going to help you connect better with employees who are looking for this, right? So even if you say, I don't care about this stuff at all, which, maybe you should, but if you don't care about this at all, care about it because it's going to allow you to attract the right kind of workers to come team up with you. Insight 9, plan giving is going to continue to take center stage. And so as you build your career, right, for years we've been in this place where plan giving takes a backseat in long-term strategy. And while it remains a long-term strategy, because the earlier you invest in it, money coming in through plan gifts is going to get more and more frequent. And over the next 20 years, realized bequests are going to come in on a regular basis for charities. And leadership is going to start asking, why aren't we farther along in plan giving? And they'll be hiring folks who have plan giving certifications or specialties across the board, right? And so if you're thinking about, I want to become advanced in my career, spending even a few months doing your research and getting smart on plan giving can be a really good way to become a very attractive employee. Insight 10, when we think about what roles might exist that don't exist now, that don't exist today, there's going to be something like, and these names aren't going to be perfect, at larger organizations, they'll have a director of inclusive fundraising strategy. You'll certainly have an AI integration specialist. You'll have someone doing digital outreach and texting. Texting is going to be a really big thing going forward. Social media and donor relations, right? People doing one-to-one work on social media. A chief AI officer at the highest levels that are working with fundraising and program. And so you'll start to see these, right? And start to see, oh, is that a job that I want in the future? How do I start shaping my career so that I'm ready as those jobs become available? All right, so what are we doing right now? What do we need to do to prepare for the future as we think about this relatively near-term future, right? A lot of these trends are happening immediately, but they're going to continue on for the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, step 1. Gen Z is here whether you like it or not. Gen X is here whether you like it or not. Millennials are sticking around whether you like it or not. Boomers are still going to be around for a little bit in the workforce whether you like it or not. And so rather than sort of whine about it, which, Gen Z whines about boomers, boomers whine about millennials, millennials whine about Gen X, get used to it, right? And as a manager in 2024, 2034, you can be leading a team spanning multiple generations. You want to be respectful of existing generational differences. You want to implement mentorship and reverse mentorship, right? What can the Gen Zers teach the older Gen Xers and vice versa as a way to do this, right? When we think about communication preferences, right? So Gen Z versus boomers. Boomers tend to be very formal and detailed. Please review the attached detailed plan and share your feedback via email by the end of the week. And then millennials, in particular Gen X, are more comfortable with direct but informal communication. Quick reminder, our team meeting starts at 10 on Zoom. And then Gen Z, obviously, even more informal, more emojis, et cetera. So if you're in the younger crew, right? If you're in sort of like younger millennials, Gen Z, You want to recognize and respect the experience and knowledge of older coworkers. You want to learn as much as you possibly can from them. You want to avoid slang and overly casual language in professional communications, especially with donors. If you know your coworker prefers face-to-face meetings over emails, try to do that, right? Be open here. And be patient with processes that might feel outdated to you but are valued by older colleagues and have worked, right? There may be something to learn from them. Now, if you're in the older crew, right, this is all relative. You're not old, but older crew, boomers and the older Gen X folks, figure out, hey, are any of our existing workplaces policies outdated? If our emails use exclamation points or emojis or less formal language, especially internally, is that okay as long as the communication is actually quite clear, right? Is less formal but extremely clear. Are we doing team building exercises to really build cohorts across generations? Do we need flexible working hours, especially with folks doing childcare or other things? And can we set up a space for informal team discussions and quick updates where everyone can communicate in the way that feels most normal to them, right? This is a really interesting place to be. All right, step 2. Now, some of you, when we talked about this, I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we did a session. We said, hey, we're going to talk all about building your career. Some of you will be at the end of your career. That's not going to matter. And a bunch of folks hopped in the chat immediately and said, no, actually, the end of the career is exactly when I need to figure out what to do next in this changing world. So if you're thinking about, okay, I don't really want to work full time, at some point, and maybe I'm retiring in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or even this year, maybe I'm retiring right now, but I don't want to go from 100 to 0 immediately, right? Remember that you have skills and experiences that are so desperately needed, and a couple of options you might consider, right? Think about all of these job openings. You might want to email a job, a local nonprofit with a job opening and say, look, I can't give you 40 hours a week, but I could consult and help you set up that program and get somebody else smart. If you can't find a plan giving expert, if you can't find a major giving expert, but you've got like a smart, young, hungry person, I could come in and consult and help get them up to speed. You could help manage a plan giving program in part-time capacity. You consider sitting on the board, right? These boards always need more fundraisers. Now, how do you find these? Well, certainly you can actually just go on the websites of local charities. The other thing is, your local AFP, your local charitable gift planning council. These tend to be really good to get to know folks and say, okay, well, how's the job search going in your organization? What needs do you have? Big shout out to our local AFPs. Step 3, we do a lot of hiring, and when we think about in-demand skills, the human relationships, being able to build great relationships, not in danger of being replaced by AI, incredibly important, right? So you want to get really good at that one-to-one donor relationship across the board. Creative and analytical thinking doesn't get replaced by AI. In a world where more content is AI generated, human creativity and discernment, right? Good judgment is even more critical. Build your own creative and analytical skills by doing more brainstorming opportunities, more practice problem solving, exposing yourself to opposing viewpoints, which can be underdone in this time. And then obviously things like Coursera, Masterclass, Udemy, et cetera, all have great e-learning classes. And the people that we know that are the most successful in their careers are just constantly upskilling themselves, constantly. The most sought after fundraisers will be proficient in AI starting in about 12 months, right? This is going to go from a nice to have to a must in a relatively soon amount of time. If you aren't already using it, go check out Willy or Sophie through FreeWill. It's just willy.freewill.com. Go check out ChatGPT. Go check out Claude from Anthropic. It's a GPT competitor. You can check online for AI certification courses. These are popping up all over. Some of them are quite good, and it's a great thing to add to your LinkedIn, your resume. And just to say this again, AI has gone from oh, that's cool, to a must-have skill in a relatively short amount of time. And if you can outsource a whole bunch of your work to AI and focus on the most important things, you will be so much better off than your colleagues who won't do that. Step 4, there's a big component of DEI in the workplace going forward, in organizationally and in fundraising. There's a lot of great toolkits. What you want to do is get curious about what your nonprofit is already doing, because more and more donors will be asking you about this as you go forward, right? So you want to be able to speak comfortably about this, even if you're not running the show on this. You want to make sure you can answer questions about it, and you can ask questions of prospective employers to figure out get a sense of of where that is. Step 5. If you are not smart about plan giving already, this is the time. By 2041, all baby boomers will have reached or surpassed the average life expectancy of 77 years old, right? That is only 17 years away. Many of them are creating or updating their estate plans now as they approach major life transitions. These transitions present a valuable opportunity to educate and assist donors in creating their plans, and they're going to be one of the largest drivers of revenue and gifts to your organization over the next 5 years. If you can get smart about this, it will open up really big possibilities in a relatively short amount of time, especially because of all these job openings that are happening as people retire. So there are a lot of incredibly smart and accomplished directors of plan giving or directors of development that have to know about plan giving who are saying, I'm having such a good time, but I'm ready to retire. I'm going to do some consulting on the side. But these roles are opening up and plan giving expertise is going to be a must. So make sure you get smart about that. According to CCS's plan giving report, CCS is a great consultancy, organizations with at least one dedicated plan giving staff person raise 300% more than those with no staff on this. And so you can tell how big a deal this is, right? When we ask folks, because we're getting into this great wealth transfer, how high a priority is this? What we see is 23% say it's a very high priority, the top number, and another 28% say it's a 4 out of 5. So this is a really big deal, and it's going to reward the folks who are good at it. When we asked, though, if you would dedicate plan giving staff member, 30% say yes, 12% say part-time, and 56% say no. So you're going to start to see that 56% push down as people go out and hire a new staff member, and this is a really big opportunity for you. Right? If you're a FreeWill partner, we highly recommend completing our plan giving partner trainings, and we recommend everyone else leverage all the resources we have. We put all this work into them. They're all free for you. You can go check out our plan giving report, and you can see, we'll send the links around when you get the slides. Previously recorded plan giving webinars, each worth 1.0 CFRE credits, but it will get you smart really quickly. We really do our best to look at all the information available and distill it down to the most important things you need to know to understand how this works and then take immediate action. So go check that out if you haven't already. All right, we're going to pause. We're going to talk about a couple of resources. We're going to answer some questions. We're going to end a little bit early today. So first things first, my colleague Phoebe, bless you, Phoebe, for all the hard work you put in here, is going to drop a survey in the chat. Thank you, Phoebe. First thing in the survey is, if you'd like a copy of this book called Managing to Change the World, The Nonprofit Manager's Guide to Getting Results. It is excellent, 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 by Allison Green and Jeffrey Hauser. You don't need to be a manager to read this, right? There is a lot to add to your work in terms of managing your peers, managing upwards, project management, all these things. Highly recommend. It's only about 170 pages. It's very readable and love it. Again, if you don't get it from more than 20, feel free to go to your local independent bookstore, or you might have to order it online from an independent bookstore. Okay, on Thursday, if you would like to join us, we're going to do a session on some new technology around plan giving, what we call microsites, right? So these are parts of your website that explain to donors how to make plan gifts, give them a lot of education, a lot of motivation, and give them some real clear ways to take action. So if you'd like to join, that is about 47 hours from today on Thursday at noon Eastern. We'd love to see you there. I will be leading it. It will be about half an hour. Feel free to take lunch while you're doing it. It's very informal and should be fun. A couple of other things before we get started, before we wrap up, excuse me. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks. 5 strategies to prepare for a bigger and better end of year 2024. I feel like I'm ruining your summer by telling you that end of year is just around the corner, but it is. And most people are going to take the necessary steps to have a successful end of year over the next few months. And so we're going to dive in on a bunch of trends that are happening, what to do about the election, what to do about the stock market, all these things. It should be a lot of fun. We'd love for you to join us. So if you fill out the survey, we'll make sure to send you an invite. And if you have any ideas you want to share or anything else you want to say, you can find me on LinkedIn, which is Patrick Schmitt at FreeWill, or my email address is right there. Pardon me. And with that, we're going to do a couple minutes of questions. I'm just going to pull them up. And then we'll end a little bit early today. So great questions. Question from Alyssa. Has there been any research into whether donors, particularly legacy donors, are less open to talk to younger people or trust them with their money? As Gen Z, I sometimes find that older donors are happy to chat with me, but they assume I don't know what I'm talking about. Ooh, great question. Alyssa, we haven't seen any evidence that older donors don't trust younger folks, right? But I think what they want to see is your excitement about the issue. And so it may be the case that, if you're 70 and you're talking to 25-year-olds, you know more than a lot of 25-year-olds because you've been around for 55 years more, 45 years more, excuse me. And, that's going to be something you deal with, right? And you have 70-year-olds who are used to people respecting their elders because that's what they did. And you, the 25-year-old, might not have that same feeling. And so think about what are the ways where you can share, you can sort of demonstrate that you know a lot of things, you can share your excitement for it, and being open to learn from them is going to go a really long way, right? I think one of the things that's been really challenging, I think, for the oldest folks in the workplace is that sometimes they feel like the youngest folks entering the workforce don't want to learn from them. And they feel like they've learned a lot over the decades. And so if you're opening to learning from them, I think they'll be open to learning from you as well. Great question. Chris says, can we allow these who are hiring remotely to share at the end of the webinar? Chris, I think we have too many people. We often have about 1,000 to 2,000 people on these, so we can't sort of open the floor. But if you do have jobs, let us know. We can share them on LinkedIn if you're hiring some folks. Good questions. Orion says, do you think being a CFRE is going to be important in the future? I just earned mine. I really do. I think it's really important because one of the things that's happening is you have this scarcity of workers, but it's also easier to apply for jobs than it's ever been, right? Because I can find the jobs, I can apply anywhere in the country, I can copy and paste. Like it used to be a real pain to apply for a single job. And it's just not anymore, right? And now people are even using AI to help write cover letters. And so there are certain signals in your resume that are going to be really important when you apply for fundraising jobs. I think CFRE is one of them. I think some of these certifications in planned giving or smart giving are going to be really useful. It just shows that you're really in tune with what's happening with nonprofits and nonprofit fundraising. Great question. Sarah says, do you have any insights about trends in planned giving changing with the increase in donor advised funds? Sarah, I think there's a couple things happening, right? Obviously, donor advised funds are just massively growing. And it's probably one area that we didn't talk enough about in this session because we've talked about it elsewhere. But if you think about being a really good fundraiser over the next 5 years, getting really smart about donor advised funds as well is a really key component. Now, some people are going to leave their gifts, part of their estate into a donor advised fund and not to a charity, but then that will have to be distributed anyway. Some people are going to start leaving their donor advised fund to a specific charity. And so we need to get smarter about these across the board. And that's the case. So good question, Sarah. Good question. So, all right, last question. Well, there's two good questions. There's an anonymous question that says, how do we gently coach our Gen Z colleagues to understand that using over-the-type hyperbole makes them sound less serious and competent than they actually are? And the person writes, LOL. Okay, so the example here is something like, I just had the absolute worst day ever, or whatever, and it's not actually the worst day. I think, this is an area where giving cultural feedback is useful and say, listen, when you describe everything in the most superlative terms, it makes it hard for me to discern what is actually super important and what is not. And so I just need your help, understanding what is actually the most important thing ever and what is not. But language sort of takes its own journey, as those of you watch the de-evolution of the word literally, which used to mean something and now often means quite the opposite. So good question there. And then Katie says, for smaller shops that don't have planned giving teams, Do you have some tips on bringing up bequests or estate gifts with our donors? Because talking about mortality can be hard. Yeah, great question, Katie. We see this a lot. So one of the things is just talk about what other people are already doing. Hey, I want to tell you about 3 things that a lot of donors are doing to support the cause that you really care about. One is a lot of them are becoming monthly donors. 2 is a lot of people are volunteering. And 3 is a lot of people actually choose to put us in their will so that, if they ever pass away, they get to continue some of the work. Do you want to hear more about any of those things? And adding it as one of several options tends to be quite useful. All right, so we're going to pause there. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already, please click the link in the chat right now to fill out the survey. It really helps us understand what's useful. It also is the only path to you getting that book and getting the slides. So please make sure to do that. But I just want to say, obviously we're always grateful for you all joining here, and we put a lot of work into doing this. But I think particularly in this one, really glad to have you here as we think about all the good you're going to do over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and in some cases 2, 3, 5 decades. And so love to be along for the ride to support just the amazing work you're all doing day in and day out. And thank you again. This was time well spent. For me, thank you again, Phoebe, for so much of the work you put into this. And we will look forward to chatting with you on Thursday for many of you, and for others on the 23rd to talk about end of year, which is coming up alarmingly fast. So before that gets there, enjoy your summer. Really love spending time with you, and we will talk soon.